Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to the very first episode of A Grimes' Sunday Roast. That's what I decided to call it. I mean, Grumpy Grandad had some different ideas, of course, as he always does. Honestly, he's wasted doing what he has done all of his life. He ought to have been in television, clearly. You know, spending so long knowing what GB News are up to, he can probably do a better job than they can. I don't even know, actually, looking at the time, 8 o'clock, I don't even know what's on GB News right now. Is that bad? Should I apologise for that? I'm not sure. Is it Free Speech Nation? Is that still a thing on GB News? I don't know. But yes, no tech issues. It was just me testing out, and I happened to accidentally show you my mug on screen. Look what I'm wearing. The Reform UK official football t-shirt. I think it's amazing. I love it. I love the colour. I love the brand. I love everything about it. It's brilliant. But thank you very much to those of you who are joining, coming in thick and fast, and hitting that like button. Much appreciated. It's been quite some time. As you know, I've been busy getting established within Durham County Council. There's been a lot that we've had to focus on. We'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later, because some of the questions that came in have been about council business. So we'll talk through some of the challenges that we've faced and endured, and I'm sure there'll be more questions arise as a consequence, but we'll get to all of them, I promise. The issues that you've all raised with me, so I put through two of the subscribers in the chat. If you're not in the chat, do join the chat. It's a great little community that's growing, and there are many voices in there who I consider friends and patriots, who are brilliant people to talk to if you find the time. Now, I asked them in that community what issues they'd like me to talk about tonight, and I've been led by that. I've picked topics that they want to hear about. So it's very much community-led, as it should be, and hopefully you're going to like the topics that I have actually chosen and agree with my views on them. But if you don't, it's a free society. You can think whatever you want. You can criticise me however you like. I've got the chat open right now. Kenny is sharing a petition, and I clicked on that petition just earlier, and it's about robust safeguards for children after lobbying by relatives of Maya, who was a little girl that was very sadly lost her life when it could have very much been avoided. And there are bad people in this world who will do some unspeakable things, and ensuring that authorities can't escape their responsibilities and duties in that regard is incredibly important. So I agree with Kenny completely, and I'm grateful to him for his activism in this area. Now, my friends, I've chosen, and don't start, I know you will, I know someone will, I've chosen Grumpy Grandad's topic as the first one I want to start with. But it is the dominant story of the day. In fact, it should be the dominant story of the year, because it speaks to the level of treachery that this Labour government is willing to engage in. It's willing to betray the British people, but it's not willing to betray the Chinese Communist Party. Now, you might think, oh God, Grimesy's on one. It's true. I promise you it's true. We'll talk about it. So, well, first of all, actually, I do want to. I need to tell you about our prat of a prime minister. I will go on to China, but this prat of a prime minister, I actually said when launching this particular iteration of the show that this is the show where the potatoes are the politicians and that the meat are the topics that the established media actually refuse to cover, especially if you're regulated by Ofcom, which, praise be to God, we are not yet here on Substack. But you've got to hand it, right, to Sir Keir Starmer. If there's a photo opportunity somewhere between the land of moral confusion, you know, bending the knee to vile Islamists like he did to Black Lives Matter, and he finds the opportunity to virtue signal on foreign soil, well, he'll be there, bended knee or not. despite having sweet sod all to do with Donald Trump's proposed peace deal between Israel and the bloodthirsty barbarians of Hamas. This virtue signalling toolmaker's tool has jetted off to Egypt for a peace summit. I says, peace summit? You're having a laugh. He cannot even keep peace in his own party without throwing them red meat on defending Islamists in Palestine. Half of them think Hamas are misunderstood freedom fighters. I don't know. They probably think that they're absolutely desperate to enact within Palestine, within Gaza. They're desperate to enact trans rights, women's liberties, and gay equality. They're just misunderstood. And the other half of them are just so terrified to say otherwise that they won't bother. And this is the same bloke who, of course, announced that Britain will recognise Palestine, what I view to be a direct reward for the October 7th terrorist massacre. And I was in Israel in August. I was there a month before October 7th. I went back in August of this year, and I went to the sites. I doubt Sir Keir Starmer has been to those sites. And one that will stick with me for the rest of my life is the story of a girl who cowered after being shot in the leg into an ambulance, right? She assumed that this ambulance would mean respite and safety. And she cowered in this ambulance, and a group got into the ambulance. Now, the ambulance couldn't go anywhere because of the atrocities unfolding around the ambulance. And you see this ambulance as a burnt-out structure. And there is a sort of open-air museum of all of the vehicles that were involved in the Nova Music Festival attack. And each of them are either absolutely riven with bullet holes, burnt out completely, or in such disrepair that you wonder if they've been in some kind of catastrophic accident, which of course many of them were. But to read the story of the girl running in to the ambulance to seek safety after managing to run away with one leg out of action, she dragged herself with one leg entirely deprived of the fuel it needs because of this bullet wound to it. And some kind soul managed to wrap a tourniquet around her leg, and she was able to get into this ambulance. And you see at this open-air museum next to the Nova Music Festival, you see the bullet holes in the ambulance, and you see the blackened, browning of the rust around this metal carcass. And that's how they actually found it. And within it, they found remnants of a half-moon crest necklace that this girl wore. And for many days, her family assumed she'd been taken hostage. But actually, she died in that ambulance after they fired an RPG at the ambulance. So this young girl had managed to survive, make her way all the way to this ambulance, only to lose her life within it. And I just can't imagine the sheer amount of terror, the awful feeling that the family must have went through, hoping actually that she had been taken hostage, because at least then there was a scintilla of hope that she was indeed still alive. But she wasn't, ultimately. And I won't lie, walking around those scenes, it takes it out of the abstract. Of course, I was one of those people scrolling through social media, watching it all come through the morning after the horrible atrocities actually began. But it brings it into real life. You're suddenly there. You can see what happened. You hear from people who were there and who survived it. Brave, brave people. Phenomenally brave people. And I won't lie, I shed a little tear. I did. And that's why I will never ever forgive anyone who says that Palestine as a concept ought to be completely vindicated, as if October the 7th was worthy of statehood. In my view, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland should be doing absolutely nothing to support a barbarian state that enslaves women, kills gays, that does this to people because of nothing other than the fact that they happen to be Jewish. Killing little girls, cowering in ambulances, laughing as you do it, the hyenas that cross the border in their thousands, in sheer jubilation that this was taking place. And Starmer rewards this. That's his idea of diplomacy. You know, I say, God help us when he gets around to tackling shoplifting, he'll probably give them all a machete. We already know he offers bed, board and benefits to every illegal that can sudden well rock up on our shores. So he's in Egypt and he's supporting all of this. And I want you to ask this question. Who is he there to support? You know, presumably the same side that he was on when he dropped to his knees for the thugs in the Black Lives Matter movement, i.e. the wrong side, during that crazy summer. You remember that, when he dropped to his knees with Angie Rayner? I wonder if he'll do the same for Hamas when he gets to Egypt. Though, to be fair, given his track record, he might just kneel to whoever shouts the loudest. It seems to be the way he does things. He bends to the ebb and flow of his own party internal politics. And if foreign policy were a pantomime, this fella here, he'd be the bloke in the corner whispering, "He's behind you." He really would. He really would. He's cartoon. He's cartoon. And this is all while Beijing and the likes of Tehran pick his pocket. But I did notice something very, very good, which was this tweet by Mike Huckabee. Now, Mike Huckabee is the US ambassador to Israel and a prominent figure within the Republican Party. Now, he's pretty forthright and he's very prominent within the party. And he tweeted out saying this on your screens right now. Bridget Phillipson did the media round. Now, for those that don't know, she is actually an MP up in Sunderland, not too far away from where I am right now. And Sunderland will do very well for reform at the next election, God willing. I nearly said, Inshallah, there. I'm learning from the Labour Party, aren't I? I'm learning from the Labour Party. Inshallah means God willing, by the way. Don't ask us how I know that, I just do. But anyway, Bridget Phillipson says to Sky News, "We've played a key role behind the scenes in shaping this, talking about the ceasefire in Gaza." She said the UK government has been involved in the diplomatic efforts to secure a ceasefire. And Ambassador Huckabee says, "I assure you, she's delusional even. She can thank Donald Trump any time just to set the record straight." Now, of course, she would never do that. She's standing for the deputy leader of Hamas, the Labour Party. She will not. She will not. As a candidate for the deputy leadership of the Labour Party, with all the Labour members absolutely desperate for Israel to, be kicked as much as diplomatically possible, she would never ever countenance saying Donald J. Trump, the nasty orange fascist, actually managed to secure peace. She might as well be on the Nobel Prize committee, because that's what they're all like. Kenny says, Palestine is nothing more than a terrorist state. These people are not worthy of being recognised. Grumpy Grandad says, the whole situation is a mess. Nobody wants to see kids killed, but Israel didn't start this. Israel has the right to defend itself. I blame Hamas for everything. They brought this on their people. I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Carol says Keir Starmer is a fully qualified, staunch sociopath of the first order, Darren. Love your Substack posts. Thank you very much, Carol. I'll pop you $5 in the post, pet. But seriously, no, I think he does have a screw loose. I think he does have something wrong with him because he just seems so utterly devoid of humanity. I would say that. Devoid of humanity. Look at the way that he allowed Rosie Duffield, the former Labour Party MP, to be bullied for the things that he now holds true. Because he was too weak to defend a woman from, let's be absolutely clear, men who want to access women's spaces. Rosie being a survivor of domestic violence. Rosie being someone who understands intrinsically the need for women to have sex-segregated spaces, to be able to access those single-sex spaces for safety and sanctity. And he didn't defend her there. He would never defend Israel as being on the side of the right and the true because, of course, his party wouldn't stand for it. I think the Labour Party has moved so far away from the party that my granddad used to vote for as someone that went down the pit. They've morphed into this internationalist lanyard class, totally devoid of a care for the British people's priorities. And they're going to be punished as a consequence for it. So, Bridget might be the last deputy leader of the Labour Party. Who only knows? Who only knows? And Julia says he can't define a woman. It's true, he can't. Alex says he's a robot in front of the camera. Damn right he is. Right, okay. Now, I promised we would get on to China, didn't I? And talk about the treachery that's going on there. Now, Judith can see me, but Elaine says she can't see me. So I'm hoping that will resolve itself and that everyone can actually see me. That's a good start. I mean, some of you might not want to see us. Who knows? Yes, I hope you get that sorted, Elaine. God bless you, my love. Right. So coming up, right, we've got, I've just torn into Starmer there as a little opening interlude. I wasn't meant to start there, but I did. I felt the need to. Now, look, we're going to get on to the China spy scandal, the Falkirk councillor under police investigation, who I will interview tomorrow and post exclusively on this channel. She apparently is under police investigation, a document so hefty, it might well be the next edition of War and Peace, right? A document so hefty, issued to the police, and the crime alleged is that she was too Scottish, because she said, and I covered it on this channel, she said, I was born and bred in Falkirk. Born and bred. You can't say born and bred because some people weren't born and bred, and we've got to be diverse and inclusive and multicultural and all these watchwords of the moment. Can't have a Falkirk councillor say something like that. And a lot of you have a lot of opinions on this particular story. But the way in which they try and censor people like me, like Claire, that's her name, Claire, is to make these complaints, is to put the fear of God into people, is to try and ridicule you on broadcast media, is to put through these vexatious complaints that sometimes take months to investigate, to try and put the fear in of God into you from representing your residents, the people of your country, the people of your county. And I think you know my stance on this. Will I ever bend the knee to those people? I ain't Keir Starmer. And on Keir Starmer, Carly says that Starmer is feathering his own nest, Darren. Yeah, human rights lawyer doesn't want to get rid of the ECHR. I wonder why, Carly. I wonder why. Could it be because he and his mates make a good penny out of it? He doesn't give a stuff about the United Kingdom or any of us, says Carly. He just wants to keep the EU sweet so he can move into a nice cushy role when Nigel boots him out. Could that be Mr. Nigel Farage, I wonder? I bloody well hope so, Carly. I bloody well hope so. Right, okay, and then we'll be talking finally a question that came in from Julia, who is a friend of the channel and a friend of me. Julia is down in Stevenage, I believe. But Julia has sent me a story that she wants us to explore tonight about Sharia law. And, well, a few of you actually requested Sharia law, but Julia's particular story is about a running event taking place in which a mosque questioned the need for women to participate in this particular marathon. And then finally, one of you asked us questions about council tax. It's a difficult question. I'm not going to lie to you. It's a difficult question. It's a difficult time. And I'll explain all of that this current present time. I'll explain the position. I can only speak for Durham, of course. I can't speak for other local authorities, but I will set some of that out. So strap in. It's going to be a spicy one. Spicy, spicy, spicy. I wouldn't like a spicy Sunday roast, mind, I tell you. But, right, come on. These two fellas here, right? This is the story that's absolutely shaken Whitehall. We're talking about the collapse of the China spy case and whether actually Jonathan Powell, who is he's head of security for Number 10, there are questions to be answered about whether or not he has been quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes. He was in China earlier this year, according to the BBC. This isn't dry court business. I think this is fundamentally, and we've been speaking a little bit about it so far with Sir Keir Starmer, I think this is fundamentally a test of who runs our country. And ask yourself that. Who runs Britain? They asked that question in the 1970s. It was actually Ted Heath that asked the country that question. Who runs Britain? And the public turned around and universally said, not you. And he was booted out of office. But nowadays we have to ask that question. Who runs the country? And I fear it's not the Prime Minister. Because it would appear that we have a government that's less bothered about betraying the British public and more bothered about being seen to betray the Chinese communists. Now, these stories aren't new, by the way. Over the years, there have been a slew of scandals and sackings over the infiltration of Chinese skullduggery in Western democracies such as New Zealand and Australia. There have been a slew of MPs on both political parties, but I would say primarily the Labour parties in Australia and New Zealand, the infiltration of Chinese cash, Chinese influence into the parliaments of those respective countries. But I would argue, unless I'm wrong, and I'm sure one of you will tell me if I am, but this is the first time we've really seen it here in full view in Britain. And here's the timeline. You might be thinking, Grimesy, who the hell are those two people on my screen? Well, on the left there is Christopher Cash. And on the right there is Christopher Berry. Now, both of these men were charged under the old Official Secrets Act, right, accused of supplying Chinese intelligence. Now, under that particular statute, under that particular law, one of the legal hurdles was proving that the target, i.e. China, was formally designated as an enemy. Now, I don't know about you, but seeing all of the signs coming through, the Chinese backing the Russians, the Chinese backing Iran, the Chinese backing all and sundry who oppose the West's priorities and safety, that would suggest to me that China is an enemy. The way in which China are buying up access to those minerals and goods that are needed to actually procure the technologies of the future, rare earth minerals, the way that they're supplying vast sums of money to developing nations around the world so that these developing nations are beholden to them. Like, by the way, Mauritius, who we've just given billions to as for those negotiations, i.e. surrender, in the Chagos Islands. But Stephen Parkinson, who is the head, I should say, of the Crown Prosecution Service that Sir Keir Starmer himself used to lead, well, he repeatedly asked the government to issue a witness statement setting out clearly and plainly that China is a threat. Now, what's another word for a threat? Well, if someone is a threat to you, they are indeed an enemy, right? Now, he asked for this evidence to say, look, His Majesty's government has to state plainly and clearly that the Chinese Communist Party is a threat to our country. Well, the statement, it never came. It never arose in the necessary form. Now, as a result, the Crown Prosecution Service had no choice but to drop the charges, because under that statute that I mentioned, you cannot actually find someone guilty of these treasonous claims without the evidence to meet the legal test and legal threshold. Now, the Director of Public Prosecutions, that is Stephen Parkinson, he then broke cover and said that the CPS had tried for many months to get a formal statement from Starmer's government. It never came. Why are we on bended knee for the Chinese Communist Party? Why? This goes to the very heart of the rot of state under Keir Starmer. Now, government defenders are saying there was no interference, there was no role for PAL, the security board, unelected security board within number 10 Downing Street. They argue that it was a Crown Prosecution Service decision, but it wasn't. If you do not give the CPS the tools they need in order to actually enforce the law, well, guess what? They won't do it. And I would be the first person to criticise the CPS for some pretty damn stupid decisions. But in this case, I fully support them. There are several reports within the Sunday papers this morning actually making clear that the senior officials, including Powell himself, held internal meetings discussing how the government narrative could shape up, right? How actually it could be constructed. Whether China should be framed as a strategic competitor rather than an enemy. I think anyone with any scrap of common sense can tell you the answer to that. And critics are saying that this was a deliberate attempt to not label China as an enemy. The government actually handicapped the prosecution from being able to do their jobs. Now, the former intelligence chiefs have actually warned, they've come out and they've warned that this damages the UK credibility with allies, no less the United States. Now, as you're all very intelligent people, you'll all know that the United Kingdom has very deep intelligence sharing arrangements with the United States and our other allies, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. The Five Eyes intelligence sharing arrangements. New Zealand, under Jacinda Big Mouth Ardern, was already ropey when it came to the Five Eyes intelligence sharing cooperation agreement. Now the United Kingdom is looking dodgy. We get shut out. Now, what does it mean for being shut out? Well, it means that the world's superpower, the remnant empire of the world, the United States of America, would cut us out from crucial intelligence sharing that would protect our armed forces overseas, that would potentially protect us using intel that they've secured here in Britain. What's happening right now in surrendering to the Chinese Communist Party by not declaring them an enemy means that we will be less safe as a consequence. I mean, we'll be less safe by the emboldening of the Chinese communists to begin with, because the likes of India are now allying themselves with the Chinese. So if you run a country and you refuse to call an obvious adversary an enemy, well, don't be surprised when your spies end up going out thinking that they can do whatever the hell they want. And I think that the lack of a robust and open, transparent response here is totally intentional. You know, Powell is in a position where there is no formal role, enough for plausible deniability. But you pull back that curtain, and influence is actually the real damage. Because those allies, as I say, will rightly ask, can Britain be trusted to confront Chinese espionage if it can't even prosecute it? We ploughed those billions, as I say, into the Chagos Islands, to Mauritius, which is a key ally of the Chinese. Powell was in China earlier this year. It all stinks to high heaven, like a badly run Green or Labour or local authority that cannot collect its bins. It isn't just legal failure. It risks a full diplomatic collapse. You know, Israel said that the UK intelligence sharing would be put at risk by the recognition of Palestine to reward it for acts of terror. Well, the US will do the same thing if we don't robustly support them in their worthy goal, mission, aims and objectives when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party. This is the most dangerous, hapless government of our lifetimes. And I think this story really solidifies that. It really solidifies this. Grumpy Grandad says, do you think the Chagos deal is linked to this? Well, actually, you know, I see there is something there. There is something there. Those links to China are there. Pete says, China has always played the long game. The West only looks a few years ahead to 5 years in control. Yeah, and Grumpy Grandad says, reminds us, Starmer did a deal with India. It's all linked. We seem to be siding with China. Yeah, definitely. Of course we do. I couldn't agree more. Right, okay. What have we got next then? Councillor Claire Mackey-Brown. So we're going from spies and secrecy to local politics and so-called public standards. This takes us up to Falkirk, a beautiful part of the world. Now, this one actually includes personal, local democracy, freedom of expression, and overreach from political policing. It's probably more fit for China, to be honest. But it's about overreach. It's about a Reform UK councillor in Scotland who I've been in touch with and will hopefully speak to exclusively on this Substack community tomorrow. Now, she's a councillor in Scotland. She gives up her free time. She does this, councillors aren't exactly multi-millionaires, to be frank. She's put herself forward. She joined Reform in March, right? And she was interviewed by STV, a Scottish broadcaster. It's the Scottish ITV, basically, about asylum hotel protests after a reported incident from those hotels. Now, in the interview, in fact, what I'll do is I'll play you the clip that I did earlier this week. So for those that haven't seen it, you'll be able to be brought up to speed. This clip here, my friends, isn't a news report. This is a calculated political ambush caught on camera, and it's important for everyone to understand the playbook that's at play here. Have a listen.
People don't want answers about the local white boy who's done this that you are unaware of.
Because it's not known. If I don't know about it, how am I supposed to have an opinion on it or be able to ask questions? I don't have an answer to that. I'm trying my hardest to bring community cohesion. I've been overwhelmed with the contacts I've had from people within Falkirk. And, you know, there is a true unrest, and it's scary. It's scary as a local resident, somebody who's born and bred here. I shouldn't have said that.
Well, do you see why this is? People sometimes think that Reform are very much against having people
that just
here.
Came out. No. It just came out.
That's unfortunate for you, I guess. But ultimately, do you see why people who aren't from here, who have maybe made their home here, are annoyed when they hear an elected official say that people are born and bred here?
People are born and bred in Falkirk. To be absolutely clear, my colleague here, Councillor Claire Mackey-Brown, has been lured into this interview under false pretences, right? She's asked about the rape, a suspected rape of a white perpetrator. The goal of the STV journalist here wasn't to discuss that local issue. It was actually to manufacture an offence and create a political hit job. The tactic, to me, is about as cynical as it is transparent. You ambush a councillor with a line of questioning designed to try and trip them up. You ignore the substance of the concerns and the concerns of the residents who have been protesting outside of various properties. And you hunt for a single perfectly normal phrase that can be twisted into a thought crime. It's textbook activist journalism. And it brings to the absolute state of modern Scotland right into that focal lens. This is a country that gave the world the Enlightenment, and it's collapsed into post-truth basket case mentality. It's terrified of its own shadow. This is the land of Adam Smith. This is the land of David Hume. And it's become a nation of frightened conformists, actually policed by a media class who think stating where you're from is a thought crime. A decent local councillor felt that she had to instantly retreat after saying something as completely unremarkable as being born and bred in Falkirk. It shows you the power of this media intimidation. So that's what I said earlier this week. I think actually at the start of last week. And I've been in touch with Claire since. And in the interview, she says, you know, there is true unrest. It's scary as a local resident. Yeah, fine. We're all scared about the tearing apart of the social fabric in our communities. You know, I get contacted by residents who are absolutely terrified because the Labour Party are foisting 5 single young men into a house next door, cramming them in like sardines in a tin. In a house next door. They're worried for themselves, they're worried for their children, they're worried for their community. Why are you not allowed to say that? I won't ever shy away from saying that. In fact, if STV want me, when I'm up in Scotland campaigning for the elections held there in May of next year, I'll be more than happy to repeat it to them. There is also nothing wrong with, I was born and bred in County Durham. Very proud to have been born and bred in County Durham. I don't want to see County Durham turned into a desolate wasteland as a dumping ground for Labour's illegal migrants. I'll say that too, Scottish television. More than happy to say that, and I won't be apologising. And I think Claire is now of the view that she should not have done that. But since then, as this GB News report actually sets out, she's been reported to the police for those comments, for that line, I was born and bred in Falkirk. A 22-page anonymous complaint, right? 22 pages. That's quite the submission. Is this a hope not hate job? Is it? Who knows? It could be a number of these really bad faith actors. They've submitted it to Police Scotland, and they've submitted it to Scotland's Ethical Standards Watchdog. Now, under the SNP, the Scottish Parliament have made Scotland into a really quite authoritarian nation. Now, the complaint claims that the phrase born and bred Many of you are commenting right now saying I was born and bred in such and such. Well, they're arguing that it may carry implicit hierarchies of legitimacy. I mean, I've never heard such cockish HR speak in all my life. They argue that it's exclusionary to say that. Well, why shouldn't we have an element of exclusion? Why shouldn't there be the ability to say, well, I am proud to have been born and bred in this country, unlike those who have come here illegally? Why shouldn't you be able to make that claim? Police Scotland have actually come out and said, yep, we've got this complaint and we're investigating it. That investigation ought to have took 2 seconds. This is a democratically elected councillor with an opinion shared by, dare I say, a majority of her residents. Be they nationalist or not, or unionist. Born and bred in Scotland is a perfectly fine thing to say. And Mackie Brown has come out and said, I haven't done anything wrong, as we all agree. She describes the complaint as malicious and she defends the phrase as a statement of local identity, not exclusion. Well, it's true, it is of local identity, but, you know, I'm all for a little bit of exclusion when it comes to those who don't have any right to be here, and I'm happy to say that. I don't give a damn. You know, Wilfred has just commented. Wilfred was born in Sri Lanka, but he says, I'm culturally very British, and I'm not offended by that statement. Yeah. Born and bred is a phrase of identity, not of bigotry. But under the new woke lens, well, every claim is suspect. Every claim of locality is suspect. There's no such thing as local when it comes to the internationalist zeitgeist of politics. So the complaint itself seems to rest on the accusation of racism, right? That there is inherent racism at play here. But this is the kind of complaint that chills freedom of expression and enforces the constant self-censorship among local voices. It's exactly why there have been people that I've known in the Conservative Party throughout my time in and around politics, where they've said some really daft, weak things. And I thought, why the hell are you doing that? But it's because they're scared. So after national espionage being at risk here, right, where we're talking about spies being let off the hook because Starmer's too scared to call the Chinese an enemy. And now we find ourselves unable to say as a nation that we're born and bred here. There's something rotten at the very core of our nation, is there not? Simon says, the police have no business investigating a political opinion. They've overstepped the mark again. Officers need to be sanctioned for overreach and fined. Carly says this complaint against her is to force her to resign and force a by-election. They are grasping at straws because the left fight dirty, because they have no real political weapons in their armoury. Grumpy Grandad says they just look for reasons to complain because they've nothing else to go at us for. I agree, they can't win the argument, so they turn to the individual. Alex says, how on earth do you find 22 pages worthy of complaint? It's a good question. Very good question. I agree with all of you. I do. All of you. Sound folk. Right, what have we got next? I have a feeling it's something that's a bit more, well, I was going to say a bit more depressing. I think I've probably, everything going on in Britain right now is quite depressing, is it not? Another comment, this complaint is a complete joke. It's nothing more than political espionage. What have we got now? So, council tax. Right, here we go. So, I had a question in from Free Bishop in our chat. If you're not in the chat, please do consider joining it. It's a great little community. Active every single day. Now, Free Bishop in the chat, when I asked for questions for tonight's stream, Free Bishop said, what are you doing about council tax? Because there have been reports in the press, and you can see it on the screen there. It says, Reform UK likely to raise council tax in Kent despite promise to cut costs. This was a story, costs even. This was a story that was in the Financial Times. Now, no decision has been made. I can tell you that right now. The budget can't be set until after the Chancellor has actually set out her budget, which isn't coming until near enough getting there to Christmas. That's when actually we'll be able to make decisions. We can't do anything on the ballooning bill to local authorities for the provision of special educational needs, transport, and other costs around children with those needs. Now, this is an expanding definition that's exploded over recent years, allowing more children to be put forward into the statutory requirement to receive transportation to and from schools that will suit their needs, whatever that might be, to put them into the definition of special educational needs. Now, we as a local authority undeclared the climate emergency that was passed by the Lib Dem ragtag coalition, and we instead declared a care emergency. You know, I want elderly residents to have dignity in their twilight years. I want children with special educational needs to be able to get to and from school and be at a school that is actually going to be able to teach and look after them with their needs. But I do worry that the system is being abused. But there's nothing I can do about that. That's a national government issue. Now, national governments across the piece, both political parties, have kicked this particular can down the road. Now, what it's meant is that we as a local authority are facing a £6 million budget deficit next year, depending on what we do to raise money, I mean. But by the end of our term of office, so we were elected this year, in 4 years' time, that budget deficit, because of the special educational needs costs, goes up to £70 million. 70 million. As a local authority, we're used to going into our reserves, taken out from our, what you would consider to be your savings account, taken out of that a few million quid here and there. That would be in the tens of millions to borrow that sum of money in order to plug that gap. That borrowing means that you, as a local taxpayer, would have to fund the interest that's paid on that rather than the care services that it could instead be spent on. That's why I was very clear this week in being called in by the Lib Dems on the decision to scrap solar panels that wouldn't make money for 17 years. I will not support projects that won't make a return to the taxpayer at the same time as saying that we are receiving expenditure set by government that has to actually face financial pressures so vast that we are facing a £70 million budget deficit. So all of the questions coming in were around, well, you know, reform promised lower taxes, smaller administrations. We've managed to save as a local authority over 20 million quid. We've cut over 20 million quid. But those sets of money going for send children, as I say, I repeat, send children means special educational needs. We cannot do anything about that because we are not in government. We are not in central government. Reform is not in central government. The Labour Party keep kicking this can down the road and expanding the benefits bill. They're doing absolutely sweet sod all about it. In fact, Sir Keir Starmer reverse ferreted back up the drain pipe like a drowned, harassed rat when it came to trying to enact welfare reform. I repeat, a lot of these kids are genuine cases in which they need to go to schools that are able to provide for them. I don't doubt that for a second. We have a very big county geographically. It's hard to get those kids from one end of the county to the other to get to school without being, fleeced by potential operators within that field. All of these issues are serious, but the government refused to actually grapple with it. Maybe if I said that actually all of those children were Palestinian, that they'd focus on the issue and give it the time and attention that it deserves. But I didn't get into this to raise council tax unnecessarily, to spend it on vanity projects like solar panels, to actually decimate agricultural land in order to virtue signal and get a pat on the back from Ed Miliband. I didn't get into politics for any of that. No way. But I'm not going to say that we're not facing immense pressure. 20 million quid worth of savings, you can do the maths. That's immediately wiped out by facing £70 million worth of deficit by the end of our term. Reform do believe in your local authority focusing on local issues, right? But those statutory duties, adult social care, children's services, I'm sure you'll agree, they can't be cut. And some councils are exploring up to 10% rises that would require a referendum. I mean, it's in dire straits. It's in total dire straits. But we are cutting that waste every single week. We find those efficiencies. We're doing that DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, or Local Government Efficiency, DOLGE, I should say. We are rooting that out. But we're also realistic about the challenges that we face. And until the government actually manages to get to grips with the system that we find ourselves under statute, forced to deal with ourselves at a local level, the national politics has to lead the local here. And right now it isn't. They're just leaving us totally to the wolves. The wolves of financial constraint. So that's the position. No decisions being made. I will do everything in my power to actually not do this. But we've inherited a massive amount of borrowing from the Liberal Democrats on vanity projects. The financial constraints are incredibly difficult. We are grafting our arses off, I promise you that. And we will do everything in our power, using every instrument to ensure that you are not unnecessarily burdened. Because you are right now unnecessarily burdened on everything from the inflationary pressure by stupid, reckless decisions that Rachel Reeves is making, Rachel from Accounts, the net zero, stupid, absolutely moronic decisions made by Ed Miliband. That is a massive inflationary pressure in Britain. Keir Starmer deciding to fund every international cause that he fancies as far as appeasing the Labour Party's base is concerned, spending billions at a time on foreigners while not prioritising our own here at home. We're doing what we were voted in to do, and that is making the best of a pretty rotten, bad job. And we are doing that. Hand on heart, we are doing that. Right. Grumpy Grandad says, thanks for being honest, Darren. That's all we want. I'm sick of lies and smoke and mirrors. We need the truth so we can fix these things. Hopefully once we get into power, we change these things and we make the savings we want. I agree. And the government... Carly says that, Darren, the children who are in the care system have foster carers who are supposed to take the kids with send to and from school. Not all of them. They are happy to do in most cases, but they've been told not to because they are entitled to taxi service. Our foster carers should take them, which would save the council a fortune, yeah. As I say, all options are being explored. All options. Right, what else have we got? Right, we've gone, what have we been through so far? We've been through national espionage, we've been through policing of local elected words. We've been from local reputations to local taxes. Now we're going to the most culturally charged, the mosque, banning women from a fun run. Now, I don't think any run is particular fun, to be honest with you, but it's a serious story with a serious message. So a local London mosque has banned girls over 12 and women from a charity park run. Now, the fundraising event, actually, it's been billed as being family friendly and an inclusive atmosphere, has banned girls over 12 and women from the charity park run. I assume that's because they're worried that men seeing these girls in runwear may well lose sense of themselves. It's if I was those men, I would find that offensive. But two, if I were those women, I would find that even more so. If you thought, right, that cultural issues were soft, this one hits you absolutely everywhere, right? It's got equality, it's got religion, it's got rights on public grounds, and a mosque banning women and girls from a charity fun run. Now, someone said, what can local councils do about that? You know, if for example it was to happen in Durham, well, the mosque have cited modesty and gender separation in that. Now, that to me would go against the Equality Act and the rights of women. But local women's groups have actually objected, calling this ban discriminatory. The police were asked if any crime had been committed. Of course, the answer was fast and swift, no, unlike the investigation against Councillor Mackie Brown. The issue is a civic public policy matter that they've said. That's what the police have said. Now, some are arguing that it's a religious matter. Some are saying public events on public land mustn't be discriminated. Now, or discriminatory, I should say. But ask yourself this. If a Church of England church had said there ought to be no women on our fun run fundraiser, you can bet your bottom dollar their heads would roll. Politicians would come out and openly criticise it. Right? Keir Starmer would be on the box saying that this was just discrimination in action. But when it's a mosque, the question is very quickly sidelined, muffled as culture. But ultimately, there's no religious exemption from equality when it comes to public events. So the councils should demand prior commitment to inclusion when actually allocating these public spaces for this kind of use. If the local authority had any balls, they would do just that, and I would do just that in that position. Because this is about equal access, and I thought the state was there to actually protect and defend that. So let the public ask this question. Whose rights matter more? Is it the religious sensibilities or the rights of half the population, which of course women are? These issues all actually swirl in the backdrop of something bigger than that. You know, the Sharia question, apparently the Manchester synagogue terrorist, he had been married 3 times under Sharia law. Child marriage, of course, is a problem around the world, and these parallel systems living and existing next to us here in Britain. So I think in a issue or a debate which actually stirs the most passion, because you're talking about the rights of our women and girls, your daughters, your mothers, your grandparents, your aunties, Sharia law, informal British marriages, and where British law meets cultural practice. This isn't actually about tradition. This is about rule of law. This is about children's rights. And the campaigner Raja Mia has actually flagged evidence of religious-only nikah ceremonies involving under 18 girls. Now, all of these things ought to be viewed as wrong, and I think they would be. But there is still that fear, even after the actual push for transparency when it comes to the what happened to our girls under the rape gangs, that actually then we would look to protect those communities and not be cowed by fears of being accused of racism and all these other things. Well, it's still clearly happening. I know it's less serious when it's a fun run, but it starts at a fun run and it becomes everything else. There is still that fear of not applying the law equally because you are afraid of being called racist. Councils in places in Northamptonshire have been asked to review how Child Protection Services, education and registrars are actually handling the cases with overlapping religious ceremonies. The issue here is the lack of enforcement. It's the tension between so-called religious freedom, for only one religion, by the way, and child welfare. We have to actually say the law is the law in Britain. Religious practice cannot be allowed to override legal protection for minors. If a so-called marriage or if a woman wanted to run around a park is valid in heaven but invalid in law, well, the legal consequences still apply. No rights, no protections. The law doesn't recognise heaven. Councils have to mandate training for all of these things. We have to say that cultural sensitivity should never stand in the way of the application in a non-two-tier approach of the law. Equality under a single law ought to be viewed as non-negotiable, and the only party willing with the gusto, the balls, the gumption to actually do that is Reform UK. Simon says, the parallel systems exist. Government and local bodies support halal food in some state bodies, so they are funding it. Julia says, Emily Pankhurst is turning in her grave. Carly says, well, maybe the mosque should ban the men from their mosque from going to watch women and girls full stop if it's that bad. But they won't, will they? Of course. Stephen says, I'm sorry, but we didn't have to import these issues. I agree, Steve. I agree. If you want to come here, you should damn well integrate, assimilate. I'm afraid that actually we do not recognise the rituals and the bans on women and girls that you may well find laudable in some Middle Eastern parts of the globe. Grumpy Grandad says, where would this end? Will the London Marathon be next? Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I genuinely wouldn't be surprised. You know, I fear that we have lost the moral clarity and the actual ability to stand up in a robust and frank way for our values. It is our views, values and culture that's been undermined by purportedly progressive liberalism. It's not liberalism, it's the complete opposite of it. It's a totalitarian undermining of everything that we have stood for generations in this country. And it makes me feel sick to the pit of my bloody stomach. So that's that. Right, my friends, I've been on over an hour now. I've got a 7 a.m. driving lesson before I go to the council, so I'm going to have to scarper. But I hope you've enjoyed it, my first Sunday roast. I'm going to be doing more, so please do recommend to all of your friends to subscribe, share, support in any way that they can. Facebook demonetized me, so, I do need to actually try and supplement the income lost by GB News and those other ways in which the slow progressive undermining of me as a voice in this sphere who is unapologetic, who is forthright, who isn't afraid to actually speak the truth. So thanks very much for your support and your loyalty. I'm going to be doing this, as I say, every week. I'll be posting a lot more on Substack. There'll be a lot more to comment on, a lot more to share, a lot more to support. But honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for supporting me and supporting the cause that we both believe in. And God bless you all. Driving lesson 7 a.m. I actually found the last driving test, it went quite well. So I might not be a complete moron after all. Who knew? Who knew? All right. Good night, sweet prince and flights of angels. Sing thee to thy rest.